diversity, equity, inclusion is our topic today. And I'm thrilled to have Javier Feliciano, who's the EVP and Chief People Officer for Meritage Homes with us. And part of why we asked Javier to join us today and talk about this is not only is he one of those unicorn strategic HR executives, but they've done an amazing job with building a DE&I strategy. But I think beyond that, he also is going to share some of the realities of what he's learned, lessons learned, best practices, advice he'd share for any of us that are trying to go on this journey on DE&I. I think that kind of pragmatic, real speak that he's going to share with us is going to be what's going to be so valuable here. So without further ado, we'll do some quick introductions, level set on what we mean by DE&I, right? Kind of every day you go, what does it mean today? And we're going to hear that from Javier. He's going to give us an overview of their multi-year strategic roadmap. And then we're going to have just a good conversation about his approach and the approach that his organization is taking. And so jump in with questions as we go or comments, and then we'll leave some time at the end there. So appropriately so, we'll just warn you what you're in for here, right? There's Javier's BA on the left, mine on the right. So between Hero and Javier, they'll keep me in line, and we'll keep this on track and make sure that it's a structured and meaningful, logical dialogue here in terms of where we go. So a little bit about Javier. He's the EVP and CHRO at Meritage Homes. Prior HR roles with Ford, Pepsi, Apollo Education, Vallejo, serves on the board here in Phoenix for the Arizona Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. And speaking of DE&I, right, I'm already going to show a little bit of my bias. He's a Michigan State grad twice, which I think is really fantastic because I also am a Michigan State grad. So I just help being biased go white, right there. But, you know, in HR, we've talked for a long time about strategic HR leadership and a seat at the table. And one of the things that I've been impressed with HR, with Javier's group is not only has he built a strategic HR team at Meritage, but the function is treated that way, importantly, because they do work at that level, right? They start with strategy, then they move to execution. And it's not just DE&I, it's everything they do. They've earned that seat with the business because they're business people who have expertise in the human side of the business and the talent side of the business. So they bring that to bear in a really outcome-oriented way. And I think you're going to see that when we talk about their DE&I strategy. So just in general, I look at the HR function at Meritage Homes and say, that's the kind of strategic HR function we all have talked about for many, many years. And it's been led expertly with Javier and his team over there. And he'd be the first to tell you it is a team and it is a great team. But that's why I wanted to have him join us, because it's not tactical, right? It is strategic, and then they execute tactics at a really, really high level. So Javier, thank you for joining us. Really glad to have you here today.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation. I probably should have skipped this part so you could say it without me on the screen, but appreciate the kind words.
Right.
Yeah, I'm excited for the conversation today.
Yeah. So I'm going to let Javier just tell you a little bit about his organization, and then we'll move into kind of a discussion around what is DE&I, what are we talking about these days? But Javier, tell us a little bit about Meritage Homes. Oops, I'm sorry.
Yeah, great. Thanks. Again, thanks for having us. So we're a residential single family public home builder based in Scottsdale, Arizona. And Meritage has been on this really incredible growth trajectory over the course of the last several years. And this is just a special, organization to be a part of. But we recently became the 5th largest home builder in the country. We have ambitious goals for the future, and all this work contributes to and is part of how we think about our success. And so we'll talk about that a bit today. But so we've been around for a long time, since 1986. Our chairman and executive chairman and original CEO, my first boss here, Steve Hilton, started the company here in Scottsdale many, many years ago. And we're focused on this idea of delivering the American dream, the idea of home ownership being a key part of what we aspire to. And so it's a mission-based organization, and in the way we think about our business and the way we think about our culture and the way we support our and enable our people is all kind of interwoven into that idea, and that's where it starts. And so it's we got a lot of awards and recognitions, and that the team is really has achieved over the years. So it's a good place to be, and we're excited for the future here.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible success story, right? To go from a founder locally here in Phoenix to $6 billion publicly traded organization with a national footprint. So Meritage has communities, in the Southeast, in the Southwest, Colorado, I think going into Utah, some other areas. They're pretty well nationwide in a bunch of markets regionally and continuing to grow. So it's been amazing. And recently, right, great place to work, certification and award, won some things locally and as an employer of choice, all for very good reason, for sure. So growth story and continuing, and remarkably so, grew through the pandemic and did some reinvention strategically during that time as well. So really impressive stuff. So what we're going to talk about in just a minute is have Javier highlight the strategy. And one of the reasons I thought Javier would be great is because some time ago we were just talking about their DE&I strategy, and what I saw was a multi-year, multifaceted strategy that wasn't just either A, oversimplified, or B, so unrealistic that you look at it and go, we're done before we start, right? There's just no way. I think they hit the middle, but the breadth and depth of what they thought about it with really captured my attention. It wasn't just in their organization as one example. They thought about vendors and partners and suppliers, even in terms of how do they impact it that way. So we're going to have Javier give you an outline, and hopefully that gives you a sense of maybe what some best practice looks like in terms of developing a pragmatic strategy, right? A strategy has to be ambitious and has some vision, but it also has to be something that's achievable and you can progress towards. And I think they've struck an amazing balance. So Javier is going to outline that in a second, but before we do, I know he wants to acknowledge a key person on his team.
Yeah, I mean, none of this happens without having the right leader and spot in the place and the role to make this happen. I know everybody on the call gets that, but Regina Rivera has just been an incredible partner for us and leader on this work. She's been, she's grown in the role, but she's also set this vision for the organization that's allowed us to move it forward at a pace that's digestible for our employees and for us to really be able to build upon and establish this really strong foundation that we can accelerate our work from in the future. And so I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Regina and her work and her leadership here. And so she's the expert internally. Okay. So I'm just going to tell you what this is about from my perspective. And outside of Regina, we've got this really, and I'll talk about partnerships in the future, but Richard Smith, an external partner of ours from Benton and Bradford, really helped us set our path and chart our course forward. And there are others too that I'd like to acknowledge, but Regina's been at the center of it from the start.
Yeah, I've had the pleasure of working with Regina for years. She's an amazing human, very talented, and I think I expect her low B would be appreciative that she didn't have to come on the webinar and talk about it, but if you did speak to her one-on-one, you'd be wowed by her knowledge and expertise. And I think there's a little bit of a best practice there is you have to have some folks internally that can champion it, like Javier has in Regina, but he alluded to, they also went and got some external resources to help that he'll talk a bit more about, but it doesn't mean it's Regina's job, right? Unless this turns into a business strategy, it won't work. It can't be one person's thing. A champion and a resource is one thing, and she's amazing at this and other things. But the other thing is that she's working it through the organization and the business, as we're going to hear. So what we'll do now is just give you a highlight, kind of a one-pager. It's not all that there is to their strategy, but this is what it is. And I'll let Javier kind of take you through the key elements of their strategy. And then we'll talk about why did they build it that way and how did they get their lessons learned, all of that.
Yeah. Thank you, Tom. And look, I want to encourage everybody to participate in this discussion today, but I also want to acknowledge the fact that, it's challenging sometimes in this work to you're not going to have all the answers, right? And so this continuum that's on the screen here is representative of exactly that. We didn't have the answers. I was at a HR leader meeting, and this leader in our industry is no longer, that kind of moved on from the role, had shared their thinking around this roadmap, this continuum that you've got in front of you, that he shared freely. And so I bring that up because I think it's important for us, for all of us, as we think about DE&I across our businesses and industries and across the country and around the world, to lean into this together. There really shouldn't be any secrets. This is about doing good work, doing the right work, and ensuring that you've got options to consider, because every strategy is going to be a bit unique, and that's something that was a lesson learned for us as we embarked on this work. This has got to be right for your organization, and so how you define it, how you build it out, is critically important. And so this has really just been kind of a bit of a check for us over the years as we try to determine where we're going to land over time. We want to get to move ourselves to the right of this chart over time in some of these key areas, and we flush those out internally through a more kind of near-term roadmap to how we achieve success in a given year and over the course of 2 to 3 years. But we started to say, okay, how can we get to this area of strategic here pretty quickly, since we're still early in this journey. We started this work in earnest in late 2019, and then started to very quickly engaged our board and thought about how do we connect this in a way that's meaningful, not only to us internally as an organization, but ensure that leadership is fully aligned and key decision makers and supporters of where we head as an organization get it and feel like they can be a part of it. And so these are words on a piece of paper, but at the end of the day, it helps put some clarity around things that you want to aspire to for the future. And so, we think we're further along. We put this oval around the center here, probably a bit further along in some spots than others. And, but again, it's, what you should take away from this conversation, and it's probably known by most of you, is there's no destination in this work. This is really a journey that requires continued investment, focus, commitment as an organization. So I think, as much as, I think a lot of people would like to say, we've gotten there, we've achieved whatever, mark of greatness you aspire to, know that it's always going to evolve and it's going to change, because these are, living, breathing organizations. So if you want to stay in front of it, you've got to think about it that way. Yeah.
Javier, I think one of the things that you expressed to me and in some of our conversations is this idea that DE&I kind of maybe has been viewed maybe by the business as a whole as kind of something you had to do, something you had to comply with. And I think that's under that standard thing, of kind of play defense, if you will, because maybe an organization wasn't sure what they should do or what their strategy was that made sense for the business. And I think what you've talked about that I've been so struck by is how do we kind of, if you will, play offense as a business strategy, as a talent strategy? And that's, I think, the evolution that you see here a little bit in terms of going from awareness and then to strategic and integrated. It's not just something we have to do or comply with or avoid doing the wrong things on. There's opportunity on the other side. And I think that's been a helpful mindset shift to just think about is kind of solving for that. And I know we'll talk about that in a minute, but can you also then talk a little bit about, just briefly, why did you guys decide that it's not just your four walls? You want to work with suppliers, partners, vendors on this at some level too. And I know that's a bit of those down the line things, but you included that as part of your strategy. What was the reason for that, or what was the hope that in doing that?
I think as a team, we feel like we're a team effectively. And our team includes our partners externally, suppliers, trade partners. If you know anything about our business, we actually don't have the folks that build our homes that work for Meritage. We actually subcontract that work like all other public home builders. And so ensuring that we align ourselves to the right partners who have, they see the world and, see this work similarly is important to us. And I wouldn't say we've gotten there. That's some work that's work that's coming. But what I would say, we're starting to crystallize internally what that means, what that partnership means, and the type of partner you want to have engage with you organizationally. This work all starts internally. And so I'll focus a lot on what we did to get it right internally so we can start to move the work forward. But a lot of this the partnership pieces are coming. They're coming in the future because we got to get the pieces inside our four walls right first is the way we look at it.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, good. So before we move on to kind of the approach that you guys took, where'd you start? How'd you get along the journey and those kind of things? I just want to pause and see if there's any questions on this piece here or this slide. And for everyone on the call, like Javier said, right, he's showing up with a spirit of abundance as he always does, which is we're going to make this available to you so that you can take it, learn from it, hopefully get some value and use it in your own organization. So you'll get a copy of this if you want it, which is most appreciated. But just want to pause to see if there's any questions on this piece before we kind of get into the real nuts and bolts of how'd you do, what'd you do, how's it going, lessons learned. Okay. So, all right. With that, Javier, maybe take us through your approach, and then we'll also just talk a little bit about kind of how you guys define DE&I right after that.
Sure. Yeah, we started with this inside out approach that I mentioned earlier, and it's really grounded in our core values. So I think in order for this to be effective, you have to ensure you've got this isn't additional work or work that's layered on. Our leaders, every leader in every organization is busy. They've got a lot in front of them that they're dealing with on a daily basis. Not only from a business perspective, but more and more, as you all know, from a people perspective, our employees expect and demand more from their organizations and their leaders, and they have choices these days. And so we wanted to make sure that it's understood that we're focused on building an inclusive culture that's really about this DE&I work is really about leadership capability. How do you ensure that it's woven into the behaviors and the expectations and the values of your organization so that it doesn't feel like it's separate and apart? Because if it's separate and apart, it doesn't matter. You're not going to be successful. It's got to be part of who you are and woven into the fabric of who you are as an organization. And so that plus, look, I've got our CEO, Philippe Lord, is probably the biggest cheerleader of this work internally. And so if you've got the right CEO who's locked in and believes that this can be a differentiator for you as an organization, then you're in a good place. You're on your way. And that's exactly what we have at Meritage. And so we focused on defining our why, not in the context of what's going on externally to the company, but really what DE&I is for our company. So there are a lot of narratives around these three words in this work that are out there in the public. I think employees come to work with a view and an idea of what it's going to be. So we wanted to be clear that this is what DE&I means to Meritage and why it matters to us and why it should matter to you and why, and created this change approach with Regina's leadership and partnership with Richard Smith externally, this idea of how do we ensure that our employees get what's in it for them. Okay. But I'll tell you, none of this comes together if you don't have a healthy organization. And what I mean by healthy organization is you've got to really dive into, is your company ready for the work? For any of you that are on this call that are early stages or thinking about putting this into action, or maybe it's not getting off the ground the way you want it to. We had we did this organizational culture survey that we sent out to all employees, got a great response on it, just to understand where our cultural strengths were and where our opportunities were. And also understand that, if we weren't ready, we thought we were, but if we weren't ready culturally and our employees didn't feel like culturally we were a strong organization, that we needed to do some additional work before we launched this to be successful. So we got some great feedback from our employees during this process and understood that we had an organization that we felt like was resilient enough and culturally strong enough to be able to lean into the work. Okay. Because this is going to stress, there are going to be stress points in your culture, again, because people come to, as you all know, come to work with their own definition around what DE&I is. So you need to understand that. And then very quickly, we started to work on, okay, what is this? What is this for us? How do we define it? What is the D? What is the E? What is the I? And why does it matter? And we started with this idea of, we've got to build the right inclusive space and culture internally. So really push inclusion, so that you can get the other pieces to be successful. Because look, you can do a great job recruiting individuals who are representative of your customer base and representative of the available talent in the market, that bring different perspectives and unique voices to the conversation. But if you don't work on the internally creating an inclusive environment, none of it really matters, because belonging won't happen, right? You won't have the right level of connection to the organization, enough psychological safety throughout the organization to get the most out of that talent that you're bringing into the organization. So we needed to really focus on that first. And so that's a lot of what our early time was spent on, is communicating our why, defining what it means to us as an organization, embedding it with our values organizationally and as a company, and making sure those behaviors matched up with what we expect from our leaders and our employees, and then defining what success looks like in the short term. And we've done those things. I would say of this 4 boxes, we've done a pretty good job with this first 4 boxes. Now we're at this stage of empowering this broad-based action as an organization. We use the Cotter change model, it's kind of the traditional model of change, one of those early ones and we built a change plan around this and said, okay, how are we going to launch it in a way that's going to resonate with our employees? And let's make sure we think through the objections, and let's make sure we work through a strategy that's going to resonate with our folks internally, so that we can impact things externally as well. So I said a lot there, but I wanted everybody to understand that it's really grounded early on and throughout on getting things right internally.
Yeah. And Javier, I think that there is a lot that's really good in there. A couple things I wanted to just ask a quick follow-up on, but one is, and Philippe, you've got a CEO who doesn't need any help or prodding or, encouragement to champion this. It's just remarkable. He's remarkable in that way. But I think there are plenty of leaders, whether it's CEOs or whether it's just leaders in general, who maybe aren't sure what their role should be in this, or, wonder why it's their role, if you will. And I think there's a piece of it you hit on, which is the talent you're recruiting. You want to take advantage of diverse thinking talents, et cetera. You want to be able to reflect the customers and communities you work in, et cetera. But the consequence of not owning it is that sends very clear messages to the people you're trying to recruit, but also the folks you have, right? If you're not doing it. And I think part of the why is this the role of leaders and not just something HR can kind of own, is because if it is, then we get what we've gotten, which is this is a one-off instead of it's a strategy, and then it never turns into an opportunity to outflank your competition and win in terms of not just talent, but business outcomes. And so I think if you have leaders who are hesitant to own it because they're not sure what their role should be or maybe what the why is. I think that's the imperative, is that there's a consequence to not, that grows by the day if you look at the attitudes of any of the up and coming generations of talent and how they feel about these issues. But I want to go to the culture survey for a second. What, at a very high level, what were some of the, I know that you weren't expecting perfect, but what were some of the key health things that you were looking for to go, okay, I think we're good to proceed? That if they weren't there, you might have worked on first. What are a couple key things you wanted to find in that culture survey to give you comfort?
Yeah, it's a good question. You're testing my memory a bit because it's been about 4 years, but I think, first and foremost, people believed in the strength of the organization through our values. Values were, important. We got the right values and behaviors in place. The fact that, make sure that they trust leadership and that leadership is got their best interests at heart. And, that we as an organization are focused on the right kinds of things to support their success. And so let's say some of those, and look, I think Regina might be on this call. And so I'd encourage her to chime in on the chat if there's anything she'd layer in here. But we looked at this, and it was a Denison survey. So there are different dimensions in there that you look at to make sure how do you stack up against the benchmark, and if you're above, even if you're above, which we were in every case, the benchmarks, what are areas that you feel like need some work that probably aren't as strong as the others and are outliers? And we locked into some of those as well, because those end up being kind of the cracks in the foundation that if you don't pay attention to, they start to widen. And so for us, consistency, so if our leader isn't aligned with the values or, the behaviors of and expectations of the organization, do we do something about it? And while that scored out pretty high, it was a little bit lower than some. And so we've had a real focus on that over the last several years, making sure that when, leaders are acting in ways, or employees are acting in ways that are inconsistent with our stated values and behaviors, we address those things in a productive way with the right feedback. If it's something significant, then you have to, sometimes deal with that more visibly as well. But if you don't do what you say you're going to do, then you lose the confidence of your employees. And so it's a kind of one example of an area that maybe wasn't as high scoring, that we had to lean into a bit to make sure that what we were saying was consistent with what we were trying to aspire to, so that we would get the kind of momentum internally with our employees and buy-in necessary to be successful.
Yeah, that's really good. That trust thing, right, needs to be strong enough, especially because there's going to be some levels of just not understanding what this really even means. There's going to be some differing levels of buy-in and support. And I know that when we talked, you mentioned too that, you started this effort in kind of launching it internally and visibly right around the time of the George Floyd tragedy. And you got a bunch of, hey, is this a political response or a political thing? And I think you guys were really purposeful in saying, it's not that what we're doing is saying, here's who Meritage is, and this is what's important here at Meritage. And if you're going to be here, this is how we approach this as a business strategy. And I think, the desire to have it be okay for everybody can water it down so it's kind of meaningless. Can you talk a little bit about just that piece in terms of when you launched this, what were kind of some of the initial objections and pushback, and how did you message that and make it clear, like, this is who we are, we're not for everybody? Because I think that's so powerfully important.
Sure. Yeah, great question. Great point. And I see Richard's in this chat too. Richard's our consultant that helped us with this work. And so he's definitely one of the voices you want to listen to. So look, we were clear early on that this wasn't about, traditional definitions of diversity and inclusion are about race and gender primarily. And so we were clear early on, this isn't just about race and gender. This is an and approach. And there are, MPI is one of those things. You look at behaviors, you look at those things that are unique from a perspective standpoint that allow you to be able to innovate internally and create business success from the strategy perspective internally if you get it right. And so this is very much for us. We took like a both. It's traditional and in an and approach. There's these other things because this is about everybody being successful, regardless of who you are, where you come from, how you look. But it's important that when you join us, you feel like you belong, so you can be your best. And so if you feel like this work is something, that is defined externally in some cases as negative or exclusionary in some way, then that's not the way we think about it. But if that's what you believe it is, and that's the way you're locked into it, and no one can convince you otherwise, look, you've got options. It's okay. You don't have to stay here because this is important to us as a company. And this is who we're going to be. And this is what we're about. And so we want to make sure that people who work here understand there's opportunity for them. And that wherever you come from, that it doesn't matter. You have a chance to be successful here. So let's start from there. And then let's make sure that we go back to this so often that it's, we ground this in the behaviors and the values we expect as an organization. So it doesn't matter how it's defined externally. This is who we are. This is what we're about. And this is what's going to take us to the next level. Because when you hear Philippe, he'll talk about, we want to level up our culture. What's the next evolution of leveling up our culture and leveling up our organization? Well, this is part of it. This is part of leveling up who we are as a company. So if you buy into how we've defined it and what it's going to be, great. Let's go. And if not, then it's okay. It's okay. We want you to be, happy, successful individuals, wherever that may be. And it doesn't have to be with us, but we're not changing course.
Javier, we got a question in the chat. Can you describe the channels you use to communicate your why, and with what frequency?
Sure. It's like all of this work, Hero. There isn't one specific channel or approach that's successful. It's multifaceted. You got to hit it from a lot of different directions in order for it to be successful. And so, whether it was Philippe and I, doing a kickoff video to just explain the why and define it for the organization, that was pretty formal, but it was, pushed out. It was through education, through partners. We have a partner called Ceramount that we partnered with in the last year plus. That's an exceptional DEI consultancy as well that has really good tools to bear. So it's about education and awareness. And so we work that angle, the education and awareness approach. It's through pulse surveys and understanding, if we have a question about a particular topic, we're trying to push it out to the organization because we're better when there's more people in the conversation and more perspectives shared. And so we did through pulse surveys and annual engagement surveys and Great Place to Work survey recently. So a lot of communication, formally and informally, through our leaders, supporting our leaders in ways so they had the right kind of script of talking points to say there's consistency in the message and helping them learn what it is so they make it their own. So pushing it out through our leaders because local leadership matters, certainly in our business, but I think in most businesses. And so for them to understand it and embrace it and drive it locally is important. And look, we're stewards of this work, HR leaders, and we call ourselves people operations here internally. And so, but it doesn't work if it's driven by us solely and exclusively, as Tom mentioned earlier. And so that's why business leaders and business leadership internally has to be tied in, plugged in, and driving the message. And so it's a lot of different ways, so it can hit the right way. So it's written communication as well. We have, cultural and heritage communications that go out monthly, to get, and in opportunities to join in webinars through our partners. LinkedIn Learning is the platform we use from an L&I perspective and L&D perspective, and creating some pathways there so you can create options. So we try to diversify our approaches from a communication and education perspective. So you learn and you understand it the way that resonates best with you. And so there isn't just one approach, as I think the question suggests. There's many approaches, and hopefully that answered the question.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Javier, can you talk a little bit about just kind of precisely how you define DE&I for your organization and your leaders? And then what was the opportunity that you presented for leaders, right? We talked about this can't be about compliance. It has to be about opportunity. But can you talk about that a little bit in terms of those two things and how you position those things?
Yeah. So for diversity, that's kind of the way we define it is it's something that encompasses our unique background and life experiences and perspectives and behaviors. And that the way that materializes here for us is that we believe we're stronger as an organization when we embrace and leverage differences and contributions of our employees and customers and trade partners. When you think about equity for us, it's an intentional choice that we make to ensure transparency and fairness for individuals. And for us, that shows up by the way we think about interrupting bias and removing barriers and creating an inclusive environment so employees can learn and grow and achieve organizational success. And from an inclusion perspective, it's about creating an environment where individuals feel that they belong and they can contribute and be their best self. And so here we look at that as we seek to find individuals who are authentic, who are aligned with our values, who will contribute to our culture, who believe in empowering and involving those closest to the work when it matters and before decisions are made. And so that's the way we defined the diversity, equity, inclusion, kind of the words themselves for us as an organization.
Yeah. That's really good. I think, I'm sorry, Javier, one thing, I think that for anyone thinking about this, your leaders and everyone in your organization has their own definition of this. And that may not be the one that you want it to be. And so I think where Javier's been talking about making the values clear and how does this align with the values, but also defining some of those things so that people know what it is and what it isn't is critical, because they're operating with a definition, whether it's a good one, a great one or not, but they don't know that it's tied to your organization, and what it does mean and what it doesn't mean are both pretty important for people to get a sense of what does it mean for my job and what's my role. So I think some of this foundational stuff sounds pretty just that, foundational, but I think it's critical. Otherwise, how do you know what North is for your own org? And Javier said that a lot. This is what we're doing for Meritage. We're not trying to sell it for the world. We're doing it for our organization, our values, and our business strategy that makes sense.
Yeah, that's exactly it. If you try to take this exactly as it is for us and try to put it in place for your organization, it may not hit the same way. So you've got to make sure you do some work on understanding who you are, who you aren't, and what matters to you and where you want to end up. And I think this true north, statement you mentioned is critically important to any strategy. And I think about this strategy similar to the way you think about a business strategy, or you're redefining or creating a vision or a culture for your organization. You have to treat it the same way. But again, all these things are linked, right? They're not separate and apart from one another, because when you start doing that as well, you can run into some challenges.
Yeah, no one needs a new day job of one more thing to do that isn't integrated with what the organization is ultimately trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
What were the biggest education opportunities with leaders in terms of helping them understand the business opportunity, the talent opportunity? Where'd you guys spend time? What kind of surprised you or didn't in terms of what you had to help leaders get their heads around to get comfortable with this?
Yeah, again, rooting this in the business strategy. About 6 years ago or so, we made a significant pivot in our business strategy. We started to focus on become a more entry level business, and as a result of that, our customer base became more diverse. And as Tom mentioned earlier, we're in 10 states, we're in 21 markets around the country. So we have some pretty diverse markets as well. And when we started to look composition of our workforce, it wasn't that representative of the markets we're in, and is in the customers we were serving. And so when you start this conversation about how to get better, how to ensure that you're meeting the needs of your customers so that you can win in the marketplace, you have to have those voices at the table. In some cases, those voices may not have been as prominent or represented at all. And so we had to take a real hard look at how we're constructed organizationally. So I think when you start talking about that sometimes too, it creates this concern that you're going to start setting quotas, or you're going to start establishing metrics that are required for the organization or for leaders. And we've never taken that approach. What we have said is, you have to examine, your teams. You have to examine the available talent pool out there, and we're all challenged to get the best talent in the market, and ensure that there aren't things getting in the way from identifying the best talent, because some of the best talent may not be represented on your teams. So we have to have those conversations, and it has to be a constructive one. And a lot of times when you start talking about that, I think there's a sense or a feeling that if you're giving to one group, or if you're focusing on one group primarily, that means other groups are losing something. And so we try to get our leaders oriented around the idea of an abundance mindset, that there's opportunity for everyone, and you can create these, especially in a growing environment like ours. We're continuing to grow as an organization. There's going to be chances for everybody to be successful. We have to think about tapping into talent that's not represented, or maybe not represented as significantly as it should be, so that we can be better. If you want to win, if you want to be innovative, if you want to outperform your competitors in our space, then we have to have the right people in the organization. And you have to your point, you have to look at that differently. And is it behaviors? You're missing certain behaviors or perspectives, or maybe some, historically excluded talent isn't included in the discussion. Because, we're all a product of our experiences. And so that uniqueness is important in order to be successful. And so we try to get our leaders focused on understanding, again, the why, but also this isn't a conversation about loss. Abundance is there. This isn't, we try to get them away from the scarcity idea, the scarcity mindset of there's a limited amount of something here that if you give somebody else, I'm not going to be able to access it or attain it. And that's not true at all for us.
Yeah, I think it's well said. Talent optimization and business success is not a zero-sum game where there's winners and losers, right? It just isn't. And we have 160 or so clients. We have yet to get the call from a client going, we just have too much great talent. We don't know what to do with it. My God, it's a big problem, right? We don't get that, right? What we do hear a lot of is, we want to hire some folks maybe that have been in our industry in these roles before. We got to broaden. How do we broaden to get even better, more talent, right? Everyone is regardless of the economic environment, everyone wants to get more great talent, right? And that is what drives the business outcomes.
One other thing I'll add, by the way,
Yeah.
on that too, just something that resonated with our team members. If you can get your team to start having more authentic conversations with one another, real conversations, you can infuse storytelling into that. This is their experience, people that they work with on a regular basis, that they trust, that they respect, and that have unique perspectives. I think the more you can create forums, environments for those conversations to occur naturally, the further along this work will go, and the more I think people will start to get that this isn't about one particular thing that's exclusionary in nature.
Right. Yeah. The kind of over stereotyped kind of business example is General Motors in the mid 80s, right? And a whole bunch of 60-year-old white guys sitting around designing and building and deciding everything about cars. And guess who liked the cars? 6-year-old white guys, right? And they found themselves in big trouble because they just didn't have a broader perspective on the market of cars they were selling to people. And that's in extreme one, but it's true. For sure, it's what happened to them. Yeah. Javier, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I mean, one example for us is we found that women make, in most cases, the majority buying decision in their homes. So we see it over and over again, and I think that's true. And so we also find that our construction superintendents, those that are frontline working with the families or individuals that buy our homes, more often than not are not women, right? So, but where we do have women, they make up more than their portion of the high performers in the organization. And so it's more than double the population of high performers of available talent within the organization. So we started this process internally about having this conversation. Why aren't more women interested in this job? And it's out in the field. It's maybe not as attractive. And how do we create an environment where women feel like they can be successful internally? And is it that different from what men need? Okay, let's have that conversation. And then also, how do we market brand this job, this opportunity externally? Because it's a really cool opportunity, and I think those that are joined end up loving it. So that it becomes more attractive. And then, how do you ensure that you're going to the right sources and don't limit your view, kind of the paradigm you created around what success looks like in this job? You've had to have had this much time in home building, but let's look at this differently from a profile perspective. And most importantly, and Regina and our leader of operations had a really constructive conversation with our operations leaders earlier this year around this exact question. How can we change this dynamic for us as an organization? And we empowered this group to come back to with ideas, and they're great ideas, actions that we can take and ways to look at it differently that will allow us to not only be a place where, be an environment, an inclusive, environment there where women feel like they can belong and be successful, but also, how do we tap talent in different ways externally so they are interested in these kinds of jobs in the future? Somebody asked in the chat if we've started ERGs, and yeah, we're launching them now. We're going to our first 3 as an organization, and we actually went to our employees and asked what they wanted represented, and so we're going to be launching this in the ERGs in the back half of the year. But what I'll tell you is, I kind of wanted ERGs faster, but I listened to our leaders around what's the readiness here. So I think, like me, none of this work can be fast enough. It's not going quick enough. It's happening soon enough. But be mindful of the environment, and then what the team can embrace successfully, so that you don't make a mistake early on that erodes some of the progress you've made. And so that's what I'll say to the ERG question. We're on our way, and we've structured it in a way we think it can be successful for us, and we're going to be launching our first 3 soon.
That's awesome. Okay, 3 quick final questions before we turn it over to the group. What's your single most important lesson learned from this journey you've been on for several years now?
Yeah, I would say that this work is very much about building leadership capability. I think it's defined a lot of different ways, but it's really about building leadership capability, and making sure that this gets prioritized, because it's part of the work that's essential to your success as a leader within Meritage. So that's what I would say to that.
Okay. Your biggest watch out that you would advise your colleagues on the call here?
I would say, I think a lot of times we lean on training and education as the solution for some of these big issues, and I would say that's not enough. I mentioned it a little while ago, and Regina always talks about this, and others do as well. Power of storytelling and tying in business-related examples to drive home your message is essential, and you need to ensure that you have a clearly articulated accountability measures to reinforce the behaviors you seek to change. So make sure that you just don't lean on one tactic too much for success.
Yeah, I at the risk of you correcting me, add a little bit to that to say those accountability behaviors should be tied in just like your values are, just like your culture is. Right? What do you hold your leaders accountable for that really is kind of non-negotiable? Make it clear what that is. And then there's things to be learned and people grow and get a better understanding of the role, but there's some non-negotiables that have to be clear. Okay, your single most important piece of advice, if you'd say, here's one thing, guys, I would start, stop, or continue right now. What's the top of your list?
Yeah. So I would say, make sure you've got the right team on this work. They've got to be passionate. They've got to be open-minded. They've got to be business-oriented. They've got to believe in who you are and what you do, your culture and your values. And they have to be those that will support you and will also challenge you. Okay. So, it's important to have that, a difference in perspective when you're embarking on this work. You got to bring those folks in early and frequently to collaborate with you and to offer insights and perspectives so that you can, regularly iterate, and ensure that all the work that of diversity, equity, and inclusion aligns and amplifies your business, your culture, and your values. And find the right external partners, to help you in this work. It's you don't have to figure everything out on your own. And this is a space that's quickly evolving. There's a lot of things changing constantly, and so making sure you have an external perspective, someone you trust, partners that you can lean on this work is critically important.
Yeah, that's so well said. One quick thing I want to add to what you said, Javier, earlier. You mentioned, hey, we're looking for talent that might be outside of our industry or resume or job. And I know that, that causes people to go, how do I find some of those folks and identify them? And just go back to this is where PI can help, right? Because for women, for people of color, for a long time, they haven't been given the opportunity. So their resume doesn't say they've done this before or they're a good bet. That's where you can use the behavioral and cognitive data to see past the resume and go, I've got a better proxy than a darn resume. I know that maybe they haven't been given the chance, but if they did, they'd probably be good at it and fast and highly engaged. This is where you can undo, the decades of resume kind of denying people opportunities. It's also where you can use that stimulus response technology. How do I attract women to a construction industry job they might be great at, but they don't know they would like it, right? Use that stimulus response to describe them in your job ads so that they read it and go, my gosh, I've never thought about Meritage Homes or that job, but this sounds like me. I got to at least find out more, right? So you can use the science, the PI, to stimulate the brain of people in how you make your funnel bigger. And those are, definitely ways that you can help accelerate some of these DE&I efforts without, if you will, the idea of sacrificing performance, for sure. So on that front, we're happy to talk in more depth with any of you that would want to talk more about either of those two things I mentioned. And Richard is making a good post here about don't go too fast. Make sure that things are embedded. I think in thinking about why is just as important as doing something, right? And I think Javier's probably spent a lot of time on that. You have to be super clear on who you are and why and how it fits your business strategy. Or it's not going to be something that can get widely adopted for sure. So let's turn over this. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Javier.
I want to acknowledge Tom and his team because they do a great job for us as well. They've been partners for a long time, and this is my first time doing a webinar with you all. But a lot of our success and some key areas of our business and the way we look at talent, the way we think about talent, is changed over the years and has gotten better, both through talent acquisition and through talent leadership development and change. And growth. And so all through, our partnership with MindWire and certainly through the use of the PI tool. So I want to thank them publicly here while I have a chance.
Yeah. Thank you, Javier. It's our pleasure to do it. So, and Richard Smith from Benton and Bradford has been a key partner that Javier mentioned, and we always want to highlight the resources and great work of others. So, but Q&A time. So let's see what questions that people might have. or comments or feedback for Javier or Regina, who's on the chat listening in here. Anything you want to know more about, even if it's just could I get some more info?
Yeah, I would double down on that. I encourage anyone who's, who may want to have a conversation. We're happy to carve out the time to have the conversation around what's worked, what hasn't worked for us. It's tough in an hour to get to real specific details and examples, but wherever we can help, be happy to do so.
Yeah. And I think this is a great outline for a lot of people just to think about where we are, what might be next. To Richard's point of don't try to go from standard to sustained in one step. It's a process. I think the other thing you made clear is it can't be someone's new day job, if you will, outside of business and talent strategy. How does it integrate with that? And I think changing some of the thinking about that in terms of what the opportunity is for your leaders and what the consequences of not doing it from a talent and business standpoint is critical, right? If you can put it in those terms, it gets hard to argue with that's who we are and our values, for sure. And I think that's a really good piece. Regina generously is putting her email in there and saying if anyone wants to talk one-on-one, for sure. And not only is Javier ID, Regina is ID too. So you will get all the specifics in the world, and she's super strategic and smart. So if I were you, I would ping Regina and take her up on that offer for sure, because she's outstanding.
I just have one question here for Javier before we end.
Yes.
You mentioned that you don't ask for specific metrics from your leaders, but I want to ask on a broad standpoint, what metrics or what are you looking at to know that you are achieving your goals with this DEI strategy?
It's a great question. I mean, today we are really focused on some key outcomes. I mean, some of it ends up coming through our engagement surveys, or our surveys around culture and engagement. So are we moving the needle there? Because if we're moving the needle there, we have some embedded diversity and inclusion questions in those surveys, Hero, that we look to see about progress over time. On an annual basis, as we do, as you do in any business too, you look at how some of your workforce is changing. And again, we're growing, so there's opportunities to bring in new and different talent into our organization. And so when we look at is there anything in our system that might have some level of bias in the system? And so are we seeing too much of one particular group or demographic? We kind of look at that and say, how do we ensure that we're on the right path there? So how do we ensure that we're not doing something that's excluding talent? Because we want to include all talent. So we look at those things too, but at this point we've seen good, steady progress, and we're going to continue to focus on the things we think move the needle. And that's allowed us to be successful because we've seen improvements in every number of those areas without requiring, a specific number or setting a quota.
Yeah, that's a great point, because I think there's so many good metrics in a good, well-constructed engagement survey that can give you a reflection of this, whether those are qualitative or quantitative things. I think it's, again, you don't need a new system necessarily, but you need to know to pay attention within the things that you do have that are telling you you're moving the needle. Yeah. So I just want to say, Javier, thank you so much for the generosity of sharing all this and your time. And again, to Regina Rivera, who's the key architect of this, she generously offered to spend time with anyone who might like to talk to her. If you do, you will not be sorry. But thank you and the Meritage team for the time here and helping educate all of us on this. And well done. I appreciate it so much. Yeah, everyone joining us, thank you very much. This is going to be available and recorded, and you can have access to the materials. And for goodness sake, Javier and Regina offering to help is absurdly great. So hopefully you can take advantage of that. But thank you all for joining us today on this one. And Javier, Regina, we really appreciate you. Richard Smith, thanks for joining in as well and sharing your expertise.
Yeah, thanks for having us. We appreciate it. And good to see some old friends on the chat here. And
yeah, for sure.
And hope everyone has a great day.
Yeah. Have a great rest of your week, everybody. Thanks again for being with us. See you next month.
Thank you, everyone.